Hello, workers of the world. My name is James Mastriani.
And my name is Matt Newell.
And we are writers and performers and comedians and also hosts of the show Good Work, a laid-back conversational roundtable presented by the century-old newspaper, The Chief.
Yeah, we're going to be discussing labor politics, what it means to be a worker in America, and more. Everything with a pro-worker slant.
Join us and producer Jake on Good Work on Dragon Wagon Radio.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Wherever you get them.
Wherever you can get them.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome back, Quiller Nation, to another exciting episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. Before I introduce my guest today, I'd like to conduct a little bit of business. I want to express extreme gratitude to those of you who have already visited our Patreon account and registered as a patron. Your support means so much to our team and our ability to continue to bring you the best Shakespeare authorship podcast available. We're pleased to be Communicator Award winners 2 years in a row now, and we couldn't produce this award-winning show without your help. And so we greatly appreciate having all of you on board. And if you haven't signed up yet, you can do so now. Head on over to don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com, and click the Patreon link there on the page, and that will take you to our Patreon account where you will see a variety of exclusive perks available only to patrons, including our monthly bonus features. This month's bonus will feature neglected monologues from characters in oft-neglected plays. And bonus tracks usually drop around the middle of the month, so you can look for that coming soon. Don't forget that every patron is entered into the Quiller of the Month contest, and our monthly winner receives an item of their choosing from the Quiller swag shop. There's some fun stuff there. If you haven't browsed around and looked at some of the cool swag we have available, you should do that. And if you are selected as Quiller of the Month, you get a free item. So, and we'll be shouting out your name as well in episodes for that month. And we'll be announcing this month's winner later in this episode. But right now, let's go ask some questions. My guest today is Ron Roffel. He earned his bachelor's in general studies from the University of Calgary and a library technician diploma from SAIT Polytechnic in the last third of the previous century, as he says. He became aware of the Shakespeare authorship question while attending an undergraduate course on Shakespeare after the instructor offhandedly said in a lecture, "Some scholars think that a glove maker's son could not have written the canon." That idea stuck with him until he read Shakespeare's Lost Kingdom and discovered a more viable candidate for the authorship in Edward de Vere, the 17th Earl of Oxford. He is an independent researcher into Oxfordian theory and has been doing so for a number of years now, at least 5 or 6 years. He lives in Western Canada with his wife, Daria, and their 3 cats. Sweet Swan of Stratford, which is something he published in the SOF newsletter for the winter of 2022. So if you're a member of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, you have access to those newsletters and you can find Ron's paper. Ron, welcome to the program.
Oh, thanks for having me. I've been waiting for a while to spew my stuff out.
Yes, well, you know, you've mentioned to me that your approach to the whole Shakespeare authorship question is sort of what you describe as an Occam's razor approach. Can you elaborate on that for the listeners and what exactly that means for those who aren't familiar with Occam's razor and what that entails and what you've been working on as a researcher?
Okay, now my interpretation and understanding of Occam's razor is simply that you can get to the truth of a matter if you do not have to apply too many assumptions and too many ifs and whatevers and things like that to the problem at hand. So that means keeping it simple. In other words, the least number of, I guess you could call them premises or assumptions or something like that, that you need in order to develop an argument, that's probably the most likely to be true. So what I've done in most of my research is I've used only two basic tools. That's the 23-letter Latin alphabet gematria, in which letters are equal to the numbers that they appear in the alphabet. So A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3, and so on. And also its big sister called the Latin alphabet repeated count, which cycles and iterates the original gematria in higher and higher numbers. And I call that the LARC because it's easier to spell the acronym than it is to say Latin alphabet repeated count over and over again.
Okay, sure. All right. I like acronyms.
Yeah. And so what I do is I look at anomalies in the First Folio and sonnets and all sorts of other Shakespearean documents. All of them have to be in facsimile editions or, of course, first editions, so that I get the entire meaning down. In fact, my experience has been that these anomalies usually lead to clues and hints in what I call the Shakespeare Authorship Game. Because for the people who knew the inside story, it wasn't a question. It was just a game to see who could release the most information inside their documents without giving the whole game away.
I really like that perspective.
They developed different.
I think that's a really cool perspective. Oh, yeah. I really like that, and I think that it's a great way for people to understand. And if you look at people who have approached it from the perspective of how many people truly already knew who the real author was, and then it was this sort of, unspoken secret, but this game that everybody played with it, then it doesn't become this weird conspiracy theory of Elizabethan times. There was no, the only conspiracy maybe was that they were all conspiring to play this game together on revealing little details here and there about the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And what I've found too is that there are several principles that they used in order to keep the game going. And the first one is that you had to keep things simple. So that's why I go with the gematria account, because practically every literate person in Europe, let alone England, knew what the Latin alphabet gematria was. And the Latin alphabet repeated count is just logically higher and higher numbers to equal, different numbers or letters rather.
Is that similar in any way to like the Hebrew alphabet and the Kabbalic sort of numerology that's connected there to that ancient text? Is that am I along the same lines there or no?
Oh yeah, exactly. But instead of being an esoteric meaning, though there may be esoteric meanings in it, such as with the Kabbalah or alchemy and things like that, I say that there are three basic levels in documents, like particularly the First Folio. I'll go with the First Folio since that's the thing I know most. The first level is what we all know, and that's the dialogue and acting cues that everybody sees and reads. Underneath that are the puzzles and hints and clues that use uppercase letter counts, letter spacing, word spacing, and alignment of different letters in order to develop clues and puzzles to give you hints that someone else wrote the plays. And the third level is that you have to find De Vere's life in the plays. If you know something about his life, you go through the plays and you find more and more about what he did and how he lived.
So this is so now what you're saying is the First Folio, in addition to producing and providing all these wonderful plays, and many of them that we saw in publication for the very first time in 1623, but you're also saying that not only was this book a book of plays and dramas and literature, but it also was filled with like the New York Times crossword throughout the whole book. Is that what you're saying? Like people didn't have, my grandmother used to in the grocery store always buy these like word search and crossword puzzle books in the checkout stand, and they didn't have that back then. They had something like this instead. But the mind puzzles are something that is inherent to human writing then.
Oh, yeah. And that's exactly what you're saying. It's that these people put in these puzzles, and there are several. There's the gematria sum puzzles, in which you take uppercase letters and you add up their values, and then you subtract things from them, or you add things to them. And it's very simple. It's absolutely the simplest thing you can figure out, because everybody can add and everybody can subtract, or at least I hope people can. And you can also see where these letters are on the page. And one of the neat things about it is that I think that these things really exist because, one, you can see them on the page. They are replicable. So in other words, if I give you the instructions, you can go to the same page, look for the same letters and say, oh, yeah, okay, this is here, this is there, and it all works out. And they kept it simple, as I said. And another thing they did was ensure that everything, as I just mentioned, is visible on the page, because you don't have to go to Cardano grills or different ciphers in order to look at this stuff. You shouldn't have to, because it violates the principle of telling secrets so that people will get it. And the puzzles as well. Puzzle creators will never lead you astray with their clues. And that's one thing that I get with this Baconian stuff, and even some of the Marlovian things, is that they're using such complex ciphers and they're reading so much into the text and the layout and all that I kind of scratch my head and I say, well, methinks thou hast gone too far. So
I like that.
So that's one of the things that I found too, is that all of these puzzles and clues and hints always lead to the same author, and that's De Vere. And so far, I've found almost 200 of these types of puzzles that I call the 17 enigma, in which gematria sums and positions of words and texts and so on, particularly the name. I mean, that's all over the First Folio, where the name is at the 17th position somewhere, or the word will. And it's quite astonishing, because when you look at it and you see the overall picture, you can see a consistency of results, which is another reason why I feel that they all exist. The results are consistent with finding the target numbers of 17 and all of its multiples, 40 and its multiples, though that's less common than it is to get to the 17. And you also have visual clues and puns too.
Now, I saw something somewhere about the numbering of the pages of the First Folio, and that there is something there's a puzzle there with something to the effect of where the page numbers are located and how they're sequential, and the fact that Troilus and Cressida is in the book, but it is not in the table of contents, and it's stuck in the middle. And if it had been in the table of contents and if it had been numbered correctly, then it would have thrown off the puzzle. Is there something to that? Am I making that up? Where did I find that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It all circles around the catalog of plays, which is essentially the table of contents. Now, I have answered 8 different questions with my research, and they're all First Folio enigmas that have not been adequately addressed. And the first one is, why does each section start with page 1? Why are there misnumbered pages? Why are there 4 blank pages in the text? Why do only 2 plays have full page actor lists? And then the most important and perplexing question has been, why is Troilus and Cressida not listed in the catalog of plays? And why does the play not have numbered pages throughout? And the conclusion I've come to, and through my discovery of a really interesting series of puzzles, is that Troilus and Cressida was not listed in the catalog of plays because of question number 8 that I have answered, why does the folio have a quaternion, a group of 16 pages in the middle, when the rest of the book is made up of ternions, which are groups of 12 pages? And when one other question is, why is Cleopatra spelled incorrectly on the catalog of plays? It's Cleopater rather than Cleopatra, which is kind of strange. But again, when you look at the anomalies and you look at how they're constructed and so on, they're asking readers to pay attention. See, ask yourself, what's going on? What's going on? So yeah, and to get back to the numbering and stuff, well, the quaternion is located in the history section. And Horace Hart actually wrote a letter to Sir Sidney Lee for the 1902 facsimile edition of the First Folio. And he said that, yeah, all of the plays, all of the title pages to the plays have one thing in common. And that is they have little tiny metal rules separating the two columns. And I scratched my head and I said, let's see if it's true. And sure enough, every play has it, including Troilus and Cressida. To me, that's proof that Troilus and Cressida was meant to be there from the beginning. Now, when you look at where the quaternion is located, it's in the second part of King Henry IV. And the interesting thing about it is that part of the play, or that part of the book rather, has the epilogue to Henry IV, Part 2, which a lot of people have said, it's spoken by a dancer, it's written by somebody else, and so on. But I don't think so. But to get back to where the quaternion's located, if you take a look at the catalog of plays and look at how the stuff is laid out, all of the Henry plays, Richard III and Henry VIII, are in the upper right-hand column. And if you take Henry IV, Part 2, which is where the quaternion is located, and you count the number of plays up to that point and count the number of plays past it, you'll see that there are 17 plays before the title is listed and 17 plays listed after it. And that's a head scratcher for most people, but for people in Elizabethan and Jacobean times, they'd know, that's interesting. It mimics exactly what the structure of a Roman triumph is. The triumphant emperor is right in the middle of the parade. He's got retainers and spoils and captured slaves and generals' heads and things like that preceding him, and a whole bunch of people following after him. So I believe, and I know that there are some other researchers who are working along these same lines, is that was purposely done so that people would understand the importance of the number 17. Now, to get back to that misnumbered pages thing, every one of the sections has to be started at page number 1, because what they have constructed are what I call adding ladders. Now, I don't know if your listeners are going to want to do this, but maybe you want to do it. The first three parts, or the first three parts of the Henry plays, that's Henry IV, Part 1, Part 2, and then Henry V, that's the Henry trilogy.
Right.
They begin in specific pages, okay? First part of Henry IV begins on page 46. Second part begins on page 74. The third play in the trilogy, Henry V, begins at page 69. Now, scholars have asked themselves, what the heck's going on? And, well, if readers want, or your listeners rather want to do this, list them up from top to bottom, 46, 74, and 69. And then, of course, the first part of Henry VI is on page 96. Now, while I was looking at this one night, I asked myself, what's going on here? And then it struck me. You have to think of the triumphal structure in order to get what's going on. So when you look at the first page of Henry IV, it's page 46. So 4 plus 6 is 10.
Yeah.
You drop down to Henry IV, Part 2, and it begins on page 74.
Which equals
so
11.
You drop down from the 4 down to the 7. You got it. So you got 4 plus 6 is 10. Drop down to the 7. What does that equal?
11.
17.
Oh, I see. So
No, 4 plus 6.
Right, gotcha.
You go across and then you drop down. Now you get it? And then you go from the 6 down to the 4 and then across over to the 7. It's the same number, right? 6 plus 4 plus 7 is 17. Now, when you get to the second part of Henry IV, which begins on page 74, and Henry V begins on page 69, you do this exactly the same thing you did at the beginning. You add 7 to 4, which is 11, drop down from the 7 to the 6, and you get 7 plus 4 is 11, drop down, plus 6 is 17. And when I found that out, and also if you go straight down the columns, you get 4 plus 7 plus 6. And that is incredible because now we've got a logical reason why Henry V begins on page 69 instead of page 103, which is where it's supposed to be. First of all, if it had not have started on page 69, we would not have gotten 4 puzzles or 4 permutations out of 3 numbers, 4, 6, and 7. And when I found that out, I thought, oh, wow, that's amazing. Now we get to the reason why all of these sections start with page 1. If it had not have been numbered that way, in that way, you wouldn't have gotten the specific number of what I call adding ladder puzzles out of it. And the rules are simple. You add individual digits. You can use them more than once. They have to be connected horizontally and or vertically. There's no diagonal puzzles in this. And they all have to add up to that target number, which is the number of plays before Henry IV Part 2 and the number of plays afterwards. So I figured these out over the period of about a week and discovered that there are 43 of these adding ladders. And I call them adding ladders because when you look at the sequences as they go down, it's like going down steps of a ladder. And the number 43 was astonishing too, because 43 in the Latin alphabet repeated count, or LARC, is VV. Now, how coincidental can that be, right?
So the question I don't have it right here in front of me, but now after we're done and when this episode is released, I'm going to go back and listen to the episode with my copy of the First Folio in front of me because I have a Norton facsimile copy.
I've got the Yale and I've got a reduced one from 1876.
I picked up this full-size Norton actually at a bookstore in Ashland, Oregon many years ago. And it cost me a pretty penny too. But for those of you who are listening, Quillers, if you don't have a First Folio handy, you can find it online. You can find the photographs of the facsimile copies available online to follow along with what Ron is talking about. But I'm definitely going to go pull out my Norton and follow along and take a look at this more clearly because I've never really paid that much attention to the numbering until, like I said, it was mentioned to me that, well, it's the whole Troilus and Cressida enigma that helps explain a lot. And we did an episode already in the archive too, and listeners can go back and find that. We did an episode on Troilus and Cressida, and we touched on this briefly about the play. So people can go back and listen to that if they want to. But it's fascinating stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and it's even more interesting. The Winter's Tale in the catalog is listed as being on page 304. But it really starts on page 277. And Antony and Cleopatra starts on 340 rather than 346 as it is in the catalog. So there's some mistakes here. But the weird thing is that when I added up the numbers, the mistaken numbers for these plays, that is for Winter's Tale, Henry V, and also Antony and Cleopatra, as it is in the folio, we get 304 plus 69 plus 346, and the sum is 719. Now, 7 plus 1 is 8, plus 9 is, what do you know? It's the same number again.
So there's all these 17s just popping up all over the place throughout this book.
Oh, it gets even Oh, yeah, it gets even more interesting, too. 2 plays in the tragedy section, Timon of Athens and Hamlet, 2 of the most autobiographical plays in the canon, begin on pages whose digits number, whose 2-page spreads actually have digits that add up to 17. So Timon of Athens begins on page 80. So 8 plus 0 is 8. And then facing it is page 81. And 8 plus 1 is 9. And you add the 2 up. What do you get? The number again. Hamlet, the same thing. Hamlet begins on page 152. So 1 plus 5 plus 2 is 8. And 1 plus 5 plus 3 is 9. Stick them together and you got it. Now, the weird thing is that all these adding ladder puzzles actually play into that. In the fact that if you look at King Lear starts on page 283, which is the correct page number for it, if you were to continue with all these adding ladders. And Othello begins on page 310. But there is a catch. Many times people have asked, why does Hamlet skip from page 156 to page 257? The only logical reason is, if it hadn't have skipped that 101-page numbering system, Lear would not have begun on page 283, and the adding ladder puzzle scheme would not have worked out.
So here's my question. This is all this is meticulous stuff. The person who was behind, the person or persons behind this numbering system really had to do a lot of math and really had to do a lot of figuring out in order to make the puzzle work and be consistent throughout this huge voluminous piece of literature, right? So the question I have for you is, what do you think? Do you think that this was created by Edward, or do you think this was created by the Earls of Pembroke and Montgomery, the Stanley brothers?
Okay, here's where the story gets really interesting. I think it was 2004 when Christopher Paul wrote his paper in the Oxfordian about the mysterious death of Edward de Vere. Gee, I'm confusing the two. Oh, no.
Don't do that.
But in any event...
My listeners are already confused sometimes. We can't do that. We got to be very clear about names. People get crazy.
I know. Well, I was going to say Shakespeare rather than Shakespeare. So anyways, he didn't live in a shack. But the interesting thing is that Paul surmises, or he leads up to this speculation that de Vere didn't die in 1604. And here's the reason why. About at least 22 people, and that includes his widow, Elizabeth Trentham Vere, and his son, Henry de Vere, referred to him in the present tense in surviving letters until 1610. Now, the weird thing is that the sonnets were published in 1609, and most of the times people who were noble, such as Sir Philip Sidney, if they died, then their poems would be published posthumously under their name, or at least under a name. So what I figured happened is it's quite simple. Somebody heard that de Vere had died in June 24th, 1604, and that's St. John the Baptist Day. And I don't believe he died then. I believe he died, put it in quotes, to the secular life and retreated to a very interesting place. In 1603, de Vere actually petitioned King James for the stewardship of Waltham Forest, which is now Epping Forest, part of the Essex Forest here, that's in London. And now he petitioned King James for it because prior to 1603, he had lost the stewardship to a few other people. But Henry VIII had given, I think it was either Henry VIII or Henry VII, I've got to check this up again, but had given the stewardship to de Vere's grandfather, I believe, in perpetuity to all his heirs. King James granted the stewardship to de Vere sometime in 1603. And then De Vere dies in 1604. But what if De Vere retreated to Waltham Forest? Because as the steward of Waltham Forest, he had hired the forest rangers, as it were. They're the people who guarded the forest. And he could keep people out. He could see who's coming and going and be warned, hey, somebody's coming to get you, or to, through the forest, who might recognize you. Now, I also believe that was when the First Folio had begun to be planned. Because if we get back to the title pages having all these little metal rules, how much time do you think it would take to put all those little tiny metal bits in the columns, to divide the columns up for all the title pages? There are 36 of them. In a very busy print shop, you've got printers' devils, the little guys that pick up paper and, get supplies and run out with copies of books to bring to the booksellers and stuff. You've also got the printer, you've got the pressman, you've got the compositors, you've got people cleaning stuff, you've got people preparing copper plates for engravings. And he wasn't just working, Jaggard's shop wasn't just working on the First Folio. So how much time do you think it would have taken in amongst all that organized chaos for them to have set all these title pages with all these individual little bits to divide the columns up? It would have taken them a heck of a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a thing that I think modern people, dismiss how difficult printing was back then and what an undertaking it was. And we forget about true typesetting. We talk about typesetting today in a modern sense, and, we're clackety-clack on our keyboards, but setting type was an arduous and very meticulous task.
Yeah. And not only that, but I think that all the title pages were set well before the rest of the text, simply because they had to conform to what's on the catalog of plays. All those page numbers had to be adhered to pretty much, so that all the adding ladder puzzles would work out. And again, 43 of them, plus there are also 3 bridges between the sections as well. So all the plays are essentially connected by the number 17 on this page. But you're right, it's meticulous, hard work, and so-called mistakes in a lot of the front matter of the First Folio, and even within the text itself. Those aren't mistakes, people. Those are there for a reason. Just like Anthony and Cleopatra is spelled incorrectly on the catalog, so it draws attention to the wrong page number in the catalog for the play. It's not on page 346 as it says in the First Folio. It's on page 340. So yeah, it's very meticulous work, right down to the absolute finest detail, particularly when you get alignments of letters, as there are in the title page, for instance. I mean, there are some things on the title page that align perfectly with letters at the bottom of the title page. It's just incredible what they've done.
Well, and there are also, interesting places where capitalization is inconsistent. And I know that you've done some work on that as well. And that when you see a word that is capitalized that shouldn't be, it's another clue. It's another message to the reader to look beyond this image, as it were, right? Like the preface at the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Look beyond.
Yeah, look upon this book. Yeah, but really look upon this book is the true message there that Johnson is giving us then, isn't it?
Well, he meant that also ironically, too. Yeah, I think he also meant that ironically as well, because if he makes so much, makes so much out of the, this figure that thou here seest put, it was for gentle Shakespeare cut, wherein the graver had a strife with nature to outdo the life, etc., etc. Where in the, let's see. Yeah, but in any event, he had to, all the capitalization really means something and stuff. And it's interesting because it even happens in the epistle dedicatory, where they have these mysterious abbreviations, LL and HH. And I have discovered that those make a really profound puzzle that also involves the number 17. And that is where Ben Jonson actually gives us the Shakespeare Authorship Question solution in the epistle dedicatory for the First Folio. And this is something I discovered years ago when I read that epistle, particularly page 2, because on the top of the page, we've got Shakespeare printed in all uppercase letters, and they're widely spaced. And down below, we've got Shakespeare spelled normally with lowercase Roman letters. And so I asked myself what was going on. And I discovered that Jonson was letting us know that this is a spelling lesson. You're to see Shakespeare on the top as letters on one side of a grammar school hornbook, and the Shakespeare below is the lowercase letters, and the other side of the grammar school hornbook, which they use to teach people how to read and write.
So if Edward,
incredible.
You're not the first person that I have talked to who has suggested that Edward de Vere didn't actually die in 1604. That his death didn't even have to be really faked or staged, because nobody really made a big deal about it in 1604. And thus we also weren't certain about where he's buried. And it's most likely because he didn't actually die then. And if you're correct, he went into hiding, so to speak, or not even hiding, but in the sense of, we hear about today, modern writers will go and seclude themselves somewhere for a grip of time to finish their great novel or whatever the work might be. So this is not an unnatural or unheard of thing that somebody trying to produce a great literary work needs solitude and seclusion for a long period of time in order to accomplish the task. And
absolutely,
it's reminiscent very much so of, say, the Forest of Arden in As You Like It, where you have the deposed Duke who goes off into the forest and finds refuge there with his band of merry men, sort of a la Robin Hood style. But at the end of that play, if you remember, Jaques, the poet philosopher of the play, he goes off into the woods to follow some sort of monastic style life. And I know from my studies, Jaques is definitely, in my opinion, the most autobiographical character in that play. And so there, I think you see de Vere giving us a hint as to what he did with his later life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and also it happens in Timon of Athens, too. I think Timon of Athens is his rocket letter to all his creditors. Because in Timon, he's being hounded by creditors.
That's his chapter 13. That's Timon of Athens is his I'm filing chapter 13, folks. P.S. Mic drop. I'm out of here.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, it's quite fascinating, too. And I think that you're right. To get back to the original question about who designed it and stuff, I think de Vere with Dr. John Dee and possibly Leonard Digges or Digges' father had started the whole ball game rolling around 1604, or even perhaps earlier. Now, I say that because there's some really interesting anomalies about printing of a few books that happened prior to the First Folio appearing, and that was the so-called false folios of 1619, published by Isaac Jaggard and Thomas Pavier. They backdated a bunch of them so that they could, circumvent the rules against printing plays owned by the king's men. And of course, they were all de Vere's plays. But the interesting thing is that you have to look at numbers again. And when you look at this date, 1619, you get 1 + 6 + 1 + 9. Well, what does that mean? 17. I believe that the Pavier quartos were an attempt by Jaggard and Pavier to pay homage to de Vere by publishing plays in a year whose digits add to his number. And in that same year, Jaggard published a folio edition of this book called Archaeoplautus, and it was dedicated to Susan Vere and her husband, Philip Herbert. And that, I believe, is more evidence or enticing evidence to suggest that perhaps the folio was supposed to have been released in 1619, but was delayed because of political things happening. And so that William Herbert and Philip, the incomparable pair of brethren to whom the folio is dedicated, they felt ready enough to publish it. So, yeah. Anomalies, enigmas, questions.
Well, so then how does that answer the 1609 publication of the sonnets then? Because that would only add to 16.
Well, yeah, but 1609 was probably the year that he died. That was the year that John Dee died. And it's possible that De Vere died at the same time. Because in 1610, the extant letters from his widow and his son suddenly start talking about him as if he was deceased. Prior to that, it was like my Earl and my Lord Oxford and stuff. And it was clearly in these letters, according to what Christopher Paul said in the Oxfordian article, they were definitely referring to De Vere in the present tense, as if he was still alive. So I connect all these dots together, and I say, this makes more sense as a narrative than anything else. That, he retires to Stratford and whatnot nonsense that the fairy tale of the Stratfordians have.
Well, and it is interesting because we talk a lot about, and this is a very strong Shakespeare authorship question stance. One of the biggest ones that people hit on regularly with tremendous striking force, which is the ever living poet reference, right, in the sonnets.
Yeah.
And there we have an incident where it is very clear that it is that the person being discussed is dead and gone, because you don't refer to someone who is still alive as ever living. Then of course there is the play on words there too. Our E. Vere living poet. It's another one.
And the interest. Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing about that is I was just looking at the New Cambridge Sonnets today. It's an EPUB version of it that I downloaded. And they mention that ever living is usually meant for deceased poets. So they actually hedged their bets by saying, notes the times, but not this time, people. Nope. Didn't need to do it this time. So yeah, ever living, E. Vere living.
Mm-hmm.
This just keeps going and going. And my interpretation of the sonnets, however, in the last week or two has changed drastically. Prior to a few weeks ago, when I started looking seriously into the puzzles and anomalies about the sonnets and rereading some of them again for the 55th time or whatever, it struck me that perhaps the narrative of the fair youth, the dark lady, and the mistress didn't really happen. I don't think it happened because I have compelling evidence within the sonnets themselves that everything he's writing about happened to himself. And that it relates, some sonnet says, relates to part A of his life, another sonnet is about part B, and so on and so forth. And so I'm getting really away from the whole narrative thing, though there is a narrative there. But it's not that of a love triangle or the Penelope Rich, Rosalie, De Vere surrogate parenting thing that a lot of people are upset about. I believe that you have to think carefully about who the poems are addressing and what circumstances he's talking about within the poems.
Well, a couple of years ago at a Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship conference, the one in Oakland, I believe, there was a debate that was held, and it was a fantastic moment in the conference. It was one of the most compelling a couple of hours of the conference in my mind. And it was all about identifying the Dark Lady. And there were several positions that were put forth at that conference. And then there was a vote held on the floor, which was awesome too. And by the end of it all, the majority had determined that they believed the Dark Lady was Queen Elizabeth. Regardless of the outcome of that and where I'm leaning with that is, that's the type of thing I would like to see more of at these meetings of the minds of fellow Oxfordians and Shakespeare authorship enthusiasts, is more debates, more discussions, more let's put forth our premises and ask the group how they stand after hearing the evidence. And if we're not willing to do that within our own organization, how can we expect people, quote unquote, outsiders, or even worse, Stratfordian, bardolaters, how can we expect them to do it if we're not willing to do it within ourselves? That's one of the big questions I've always asked. But you're putting forth a separate premise then. You don't believe it was Elizabeth or Penelope Rich. Is that what you're telling me?
Nope. And you have to go to Nina Green's site to find out exactly why. Nina Green, who's oxfordshakespeare.com, I think is his address. She has done the arduous job of transcribing hundreds and hundreds of contemporary documents, and particularly wills. And if I recall correctly, Elizabeth Trentham Vere's will is in there. It's Edward de Vere's widow. She bequeaths no less than, I think it was 7 different dresses to different servants. And they describe them as being black with this trim, black with that trim, black with white trim here. So isn't it possible that perhaps the Dark Lady was Elizabeth instead of some mistress? That's the question I have, and I think it is true.
I think it's very possible, and I tend to be one who subscribes to the theory that Henry de Vere, the 18th Earl of Oxford, is actually the son of Henry Wriothesley, who would have been the 18th Earl of Oxford, technically, based on birthright, and that I believe that Edward was not able to sire children anymore at that time and made arrangements for his son to sire a son, and his grandson became the 18th Earl of Oxford. That's what I believe.
Okay,
that's pretty controversial, I know, but you look at these men together, and you look at the relationship they ended up having, and their very mysterious deaths together as well.
Yep. However, David Shakespeare, a meticulous researcher for the De Vere Society, uploaded a video and paper just about a week ago, just over 8 days ago, I think. And it's all about the whole question of whether or not Penelope Rich could have actually conceived Henry, because she had a child prior to Henry's birth with the name of Penelope Blount. And I'd encourage you to watch that video and then get back to me on it, because I'm not so sure about that anymore.
Okay, well, maybe she wasn't the mother.
No, because first of all, what David Shakespeare had found out, using calendars and proper, methodology, going backwards from a birth date and birth years and stuff, that
gestation terms and all of that, right? Okay, it does take 9 months, kind of a thing, right?
Bingo. She would have had 1 to 1.5 or 2 weeks between the birth of Penelope Blount and the conception of Henry de Vere. And that is pretty much impossible even for our day, when we've got such healthy people, because women don't just get into the gestation cycle until months after a child is born.
Yeah, if they're breastfeeding at all, it takes even longer. Generally.
Bingo, and even yeah. And so it's a very interesting question that he has probably answered.
Of course, I'm sure Penelope Rich probably had wet nurses and was probably not.
Oh, they all did.
Yeah.
Yeah, they all did.
But nonetheless, you're right. That's a pretty short window. That's a pretty small window to justify.
Yeah.
What if Elizabeth Trentham was the mother, but that she, and if you're right, if she's the Dark Lady, then maybe what the sonnets are talking about is Henry, Rosalie, and Elizabeth Trentham getting together in order to sire a child so that Edward would have an heir.
Well, that still fits, because Alexander Woe in one of his videos actually talks about how in a biblical passage it was okay for someone to have another man sire a child or adopt a child by another man. And that is entirely possible, because if De Vere had retreated to the Waltham Forest, in particular Chapel Haultain, it is possible that he renounced all sexual activity as well, because there's also compelling evidence to suggest that De Vere, along with Sir Francis Bacon and John Dee, were founders of what became the Rosicrucians, and later on became the Royal Archmasons, and then finally the Masons themselves.
So,
and this is a
potential vow of celibacy there later on in life is what you're hinting at. And I've heard other scholars say that perhaps the lameness that he discusses that comes out in the canon and through the sonnets, and perhaps the lameness he's talking about is less of a limp in his leg, but perhaps that wound, that injury did affect his ability to perform. And that would be an interesting aspect of it if that's what we're actually talking about here, because there is no account that you don't hear other people describe him as having some sort of a limp or as being, some sort of deformed creature later in life, but they wouldn't know, would they, if the lameness is actually his ability to perform sexually?
I believe that he was injured in a feud with Thomas Knivet and his men. In fact, there is evidence to suggest that that's exactly what happened. And there's also some evidence, too, that he got injured getting into a gondola in Venice. So both those are entirely possible to explain.
And based on the feud
his
with
lameness in later life.
And based on the feud with Knivet, which was a result of Edward having an affair with Knivet's niece, Anne Vavassor, then you could see how Knivet might strategically and specifically target Edward de Vere's manhood. You slept with my niece. I'm going to come cut your balls off. And it's a possibility that that's what he was actually trying to do.
Well, actually, when you look at how they fought with the rapiers, the most vulnerable part of the body is the inner leg. And if you sever a femoral artery, that's
you're
game
done.
over.
It's over. Yeah. That's absolutely
I think
true.
that's where he was aiming, and he didn't quite get it,
But maybe he did get it. Maybe he got the other part instead. That's what I'm saying. And then, here's De Vere going through life unable to perform his, manhood in that way, and thus addressing it as lame. And then would be an issue. I don't know the chronology of him siring all of his children, so that would have to be something I'd have to look up to see if that theory holds any water or not. But that would be an interesting aspect to all of this.
Yeah. Well, to start with, there was Elizabeth, and he obviously didn't believe that Anne had actually conceived his child, and that's why they were estranged for so many years. And then the middle daughter was Bridget. They had another daughter named Frances who died young. They also had a son, and in one of the sonnets he says the son was he was but 1 hour mine. I think it was sonnet 33 or so. And that son actually died within a day of his birth. And this is why I say so many of the sonnets have references to events in De Vere's life, and I can point out exactly when, essentially give a good few months or even years as to when the specific sonnets were written. But anyways, after those two children, there was Susan, and then finally Henry. Oh, and of course the child he had by and Vavasor is also in there. So
Right.
yeah, he got around.
He obviously was a very prolific heterosexual male. Now, some would argue that he was perhaps bisexual. I can't say that he wasn't. There was a lot of that going on, especially, we do hear, I always look at Horatio saying, I'm more antique Roman than I am a Dane. And that would have been a very Roman ideology, right? But he certainly was a very prolific heterosexual and had plenty of female partners and sired multiple children. So, but I would be curious to know.
Oh yeah,
I'd be curious to see. So, how many children did he have after the boy with Anne Vavassar? I wonder. That's what I'll have to look up that chronology. 3. So he had 2 more children or 3 more children after that. So then maybe the Thomas Knivet thing does not add up. Unless it was an injury that progressively got worse through age as he got older.
I think it would have gotten worse because don't forget, I think Queen Elizabeth it was Henry VIII who got an injury to his leg, one of his legs, and it got progressively worse as he aged.
It ended up killing him.
It was ulcerating all the time.
Yeah. I think that ended up killing him. Yeah. Well, this is all very fascinating stuff, Ron, and I want to make sure that listeners know, because, one of the things that we talked about before scheduling this episode was how visual a lot of this is. And of course, podcasting is not a visual medium. But like I mentioned before, if people want to pull out of their own First Folio, if they have one, or look it up and find it online, and there's a gazillion places you can find it online because it's public domain, and follow along
the Internet
with
Archive.
This episode, they can do that, but they can also go to your personal YouTube channel and see a series of videos you have created and uploaded there about all of this. How can they find that? What's the best way for them to find that content?
Just put my name down on the onto the search engine on YouTube, Ron Roffel, and I'm going to be up the top.
So if you just go to YouTube and go into the search bar and type in Ron, R-O-N, Roffel, R-O-F-F-E-L, R-O-F-F-E-L.
Double F as in Frank.
Yep. And you'll find Ron's page, and you'll see a plethora of videos there that he has uploaded and put together, and that present these details. And some of them are in sequential parts, right, Ron? Like you've got, like part 1, part 2.
Yeah. Well, I encourage people to start off with setting the stage and then going into the easy peasy way to tell secrets. Those are the only 2 that you need to really go one after the other, because setting the stage is essentially saying, this is what Elizabethan writers had to put up with and stuff, particularly nobles. And this is censorship, and this is their great chain of being, and this is how they believed. And then the easy peasy way to tell secrets is essentially about the principles behind puzzle creation in Elizabethan times and what sort of puzzles they have. In fact, that video has one of my own poems where I demonstrate exactly how some of these poems were, or not poems, puzzles were created. And and then after that, you can go into any other of the videos, but I'm still working on presentations to upload. And since I uploaded those a couple months ago, I'm up to 90 some odd videos, and that's in the works. So I got a lot of work.
But how many are currently posted? You don't have 90 posted, do you?
No, I've only got about 4 or 5.
Oh, okay.
So
you're saying you have another 80 to go that you're preparing and working on.
About 90. About 90.
You're going to be a busy man, my friend.
Well, yeah. Not only that, but it goes into what my I know you've got a copy of my book in progress, The Secrets of Shakespeare's First Folio, revealing what has been hidden from view for 400 years. It's everything I have in that book, plus all sorts of other stuff, is in these presentations now, because I find that writing about this stuff isn't as fast or as immediate as doing presentations and videos, because people aren't reading books as much anymore.
That's very true. It's an unfortunate truth, but it is very, very true. And we're a visual society.
So if I present all these, So if I present all this stuff as video presentations and continue to plug away at it, eventually the Stratfordian paradigm will start to wither away. Because I know that there are so many things in the First Folio that actually tells people, this man was not, the man on the title page was not the man who wrote the books. In fact,
well, luckily for me, even though it is true that we're more and more a visual society and people aren't reading as much, luckily we're still an audio society and people are still listening to radio and podcasts. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is that because it's the one thing that you can be tuned into and still do other things, right? Like it's difficult to be watching YouTube and jogging or exercising or doing your gardening or your laundry or whatever. And so many of my listeners tell me that, they take me with them in these other activities that they do, driving the car, whatever. You can't watch YouTube videos while you're driving a car, but you can listen to a podcast while you're driving a car. And so luckily we still have that going for us on this end.
Oh, yeah. I listen to the podcast a lot when I'm doing work on my presentations. So I get cross information and say, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let's see what we can do with that. So,
well, that's
cool,
you're right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love your podcast. It's just every 2 weeks I look for it. And then when it wasn't happening, I said, oh, no, is he still doing his stuff? Oh, I hope so. And then you came back and I was like, oh, that explains it.
Well, here we are, and we're doing quite well, and we're thrilled to announce that. And again, two award winners 2 years in a row with the Communicator Awards, and so we're excited about that as well. Yep. And the Patreon account is growing, and that's a great segue for me. Before we wrap this episode up, I want to remind everybody, make sure you visit don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com. Click the Patreon link and you'll see a variety of exclusive perks available only to patrons, including our special bonus features and your chance to enter the drawing for the Quiller of the Month. And here to announce this month's winner is our own producer, Jake. Take it away, Jake.
Thanks, Stephen, and hello, Quillers. I am thrilled to announce this month's Quiller of the Month. Just a reminder before I select this month's name, how this works. You are automatically entered into this contest if you head on over to our Patreon and you become a Noble Quiller or higher. Your name is added to this random name generator that we use called Wheel of Names to pick our winner for each month. There's no limit to how many times you can win, so you could be a Quiller of the Month multiple times. You could even be Quiller of the Month a few times in a row if you have that kind of luck. Well, without further ado, I think it's time to spin our wheel here, and I am proud to say that the official Quiller of the Month for the month of June is Frank Lawler. Frank Lawler, congrats, and thank you so much for your continued support of the show. Thanks to everybody who shows their continued support of Don't Quill the Messenger. Frank, keep your eye on your email. We will be shooting you one of those soon so that you can get your free merch. Congrats again, Frank Lawler, June's Quiller of the Month.
And thank you, Jake, for that great announcement. And congratulations to our new winner. Hey, for those of you who are interested, just a quick little update on my candidacy for the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Board of Trustees and position of president. I am so humbled by the emails of support that continue to come in. SOF members who wish to add their name to the list of supporters can still send me a simple email stating your support. I will include it with my petition packet to the nomination committee before the deadline in July. I've been informed that an ad hoc elections committee has been established, and I have great trust in the members of the committee as upstanding men who will provide their best recommendations to the board for how to move forward with this unprecedented contested election in the history of the organization, which is very exciting, in fact. It's a shame, however, the current president didn't think it important enough to inform the general membership of the actions of the board and what's happening with that. I hope that they'll put something out and inform all of you what's going on. And this is the type of thing that I'm hoping to fix if I get elected. I don't understand the organization's fear of increased transparency of these types of things. So I hope to correct some of that if you choose me to represent you. They send out emails left and right, but none of them contain any information about important decisions, actions, plans, funds that have been raised, how those funds are going to be used. And I hope to change that. I want an engaged and involved membership. To be completely engaged and involved, you have to be informed. So if you want the general membership to buy into an organization's goals, they need to know what the goals are and be updated regularly. Many of you have written to me about your desire to see some drastic change, and it is true. If this organization in its current state is the greatest hope for Oxford to be recognized for his work, then there's no real current hope for Oxford without some drastic change. And here's one of the changes that I'd like to share with you today. We spent 100 years trying to challenge and convince the establishment that their guy is the wrong guy. During that century of mostly failure, the establishment has painted us as nothing more than loony ticks. And I use that term on purpose because I think we have forgotten that J.T. Looney, and I think, Ron, that you'll agree with this as well. We've forgotten that J.T. Looney was not a university English professor. He was a very simple high school teacher.
Yep.
And I believe that's our market. That is our target audience. We need to stop pounding on the doors of higher academia and start opening the doors of high schools and middle schools.
Exactly.
We should be investing the bulk of our outreach capital on providing resources and materials, guest speakers, and presentations to high school teachers of English, history, theater, and at the middle school level, I think it's mostly social studies is what they offer. We need to be creating compelling content that will appeal to students, not their professors, the students. And we must understand, as we are seeing within our own organization, that it is not that old dogs can't learn new tricks. It's that they are willing to fight tooth and nail against new tricks at times. And this is a problem. So I say, let's embrace the new dogs and put some extra bite in this movement and see where we can go. Remember, if you want to write to me, you can send me an email to contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. That's contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. I would love your support, your ideas, your suggestions for bonus features and new guests, requests, you name it. Send me an email, contact@don'tquillthepodcast.com. And don't forget to head over to don'tquillthepodcast.com and click the Patreon link to see a variety of exclusive perks available only to patrons, including, again, those special bonus features. I want to once again thank my guest, Ron Roffel. Don't forget, you can visit his YouTube channel and rabbit hole yourself away for a few hours, right, Ron? And he promises
hopefully
much more content to come.
Tons more content. It'll probably blow the socks off a lot of people.
Awesome. We'll look forward to that. And when you get a few more up there, we'll have you back and do another episode about them. How's that sound?
Oh, that's absolutely perfect, because then we can discuss the content of some of the videos.
Great. Thank you, Ron, again for being here with us. And until next time, fellow Quillers, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.